Thank you very much for this opportunity. I apologize for not being able to be with you personally and for not giving the talk in French. It is true that we are in times of shock. Financial crashes, pandemics, anger, revolt, desperate migrations, populism, inflation, wars. These do not seem times for optimism. But I'm going to ask a hopeful question. Could there be a golden age ahead? Well, learning from the history of technological revolutions, there might be. Progress in market economies seems continuous, but it occurs by successive technological revolutions of half a century or so. Revolution brings difficult times of creative destruction, as Schumpeter called it, inequality and crisis, before making the leap into a golden age of broader prosperity. Well, because markets exploit all the opportunities within one revolution, following its common sense paradigm and benefiting from synergies. It is when maturity and exhaustion are reached that the search is on to bring together another set of opportunities. But it's the separation of finance capital from production capital that lets finance do the search, while all production battles with decreasing profits. The process leads to bubbles and crashes, to inequality, revolts, and populism, which move governments and politicians to find a way of restoring social peace and harmonious synergistic growth. So what I will do now is to share with you that historical pattern. I will examine how it applies to the current critical moment. So we begin with the 5 technological revolutions and the 4 golden ages. We'll look at the nature of each period, then the specific golden ages, past and future, and why Europe could lead the socio-institutional changes required. Okay, beginning with the 5 technological revolutions in 250 years. The first one was around 1771 in England, the so-called Industrial Revolution, machines, factories, canals, while the French were having their revolution. You were having your revolution. Then from 1829, we have the age of steam, coal, iron, and railways. From 1875 or around those years, we have the third revolution, the age of steel and heavy engineering, electrical, chemical, civil, naval. That was actually the first globalization. It was a time when it was possible with steamships to go north-south in 2 weeks. It used to take 2 to 3 months with sails. So that changed the world completely, just as much as our internet has changed the world now. And that's why it was possible to have that globalization then. It incorporated all the countries of the South, and it allowed the US and Germany to leap ahead of Britain. Then from 1908, with Ford's Model T, we have the fourth revolution, the age of the automobile, oil, petrochemicals, and mass production, the moving assembly line, which changed productivity radically. And from 1971, with the microprocessor, we have the beginning of our own age of information technology and telecommunications. You will notice that the arrow is only halfway. That is what I'm going to hold today, that we have not finished. We are still in the 5th revolution, and it has taken longer than usual, but we are midway and we might have better times ahead. Now, each of these revolutions includes a new infrastructure, a cheap, all-pervasive input, cotton, coal, steel, oil, and now information, and several new technologies changing market reach, relative costs, and the range of opportunities. Each of them enables a major leap in productivity across the whole economy and spreads unevenly for 50 years or more. But it's not smooth. The diffusion process is broken in two by one or more bubble collapses. What we have is an early, slow beginning with the new technologies testing out. Then suddenly you have the takeoff, and then there is enormous amounts of innovation until you get to maturity. And of course, there is an overlap between the old technologies and the new. So the first 20 or 30 years could be called the installation period, because that's when the technologies actually become the paradigm. They become the way that you innovate. The second 20 or 30 years are the deployment period, when the new technologies go across the whole economy, even to the furthest corners of the economy, and also spread across the world. Between the two, there is a turning point recession that can be very short, 2-3 years, or very long, 10, even more years, 13 years in the 30s. Now we're also having, in my opinion, quite a long turning point. The installation period, finance takes control, forcing the new paradigm against the old. It's a time of turbulence. It's a time of inequality. And as I said before, creative destruction, the new destroying the old by making it better, but with a lot of suffering. It ends with financial bubbles and crashes. And then we have that time of instability, uncertainty, social unrest, populism, authoritarian leaders offering the moon, messianic leaders offering to solve all the problems that have been created by the new technologies. Then the deployment period is the golden age. It's a time of creative construction when innovations become synergistic. Production takes the lead, supported by a proactive state. There's always been a proactive state in one way or another in the golden ages. And it's actually a win-win game between business and society. It's good times for both. And we are here. We are precisely at the moment when it could be that we have a golden age. But we might not, because history is not written, it's not mechanical. This is the way it happens when it happens normally, but it depends on circumstances. In fact, the current installation and turning point of the information revolution have been the longest ever. The championship was in the 1930s, which was 13 years. But now we are perhaps going to be longer than that. So let's look at the historical record, the dates and what happened, the bubble prosperities, recessions, and golden ages of the past. So we will see an installation period, turning point, and deployment period. The installation period is a time of a bubble prosperity. Then the turning point is when the bubbles collapse and we have recessions, we have difficult times, uncertainty, and the golden age prosperity that follows, which ends in maturity, and the next revolution comes. So if we put the 5 revolutions in parallel, we will find, first of all, the first revolution, Canal Mania, Canal Panic, and another collapse in between. They had 2 bubbles that time, with the Great British Leap following that. Railway Mania, followed by Railway Panic, very short turning point, and the Victorian boom. The third was the London-funded global market infrastructure buildup. Remember, I told you that the steamships allowed this long trip to become very short, just 2 weeks. So London became the great funder, the great financial center of globalization. And in fact, they left Britain behind, and Britain fell behind the US and Germany that went right ahead because they were concentrating and funding in their own economies. There might be some parallels with today, both with China being the equivalent of the US and Germany, and Britain being the equivalent or US being the equivalent of what happened to Britain then, more working in globalization than its own economy. So that was a time when Argentina, Australia, all the countries in the Southern Hemisphere developed, and the US also, very much supported by British finance. And then several crashes. Actually, there was a crash in each of the countries that all hurt British finance, but there was no crash in Britain itself. But after that, we had the Belle Epoque in Europe and what was called the Progressive Era in the US. For the fourth, we had the Roaring Twenties. That was the bubble prosperity, which of course crashed in 1929. That was a time when automobiles, housing, radio, aviation, electricity were all the big boom. And then we had the US in this very deep recession, which hurt Europe too, actually hurt the whole world. After that, we had the greatest golden age, the post-war golden age, which you French call the Trente Glorieuses, which they actually were compared to what we have been seeing. And then the fifth, our current one, internet mania, telecoms, emerging markets. That was the first crash in 2000. And then we had the global financial casino, the housing bubbles, all those crashes that brought the credit crunch. And we have been, since then, we haven't really been able to get the economy going. The financial markets are fine, and the giants are also fine, but the economy in general hasn't really become a healthy economy that benefits everybody. So we might have ahead, we are here, we might have ahead, if we do the right thing, a global, sustainable knowledge society golden age, perhaps. And the two prosperities, the bubble prosperity and the golden age prosperity, are fundamentally different in nature and in social consequences. So let's now look at the nature of each period. What is the nature of the installation period? Well, it's basically an intense process of polarization. We have industries, regions, and countries, some of which have accelerated and explosive growth, others stagnation, dismemberment, and decline. Personal income, some people increasing unlimited wealth, others ever more unacceptable unemployment and poverty. And firms and institutions, some spectacular successes, others demoralizing deterioration, and of course bankruptcies, and basically many companies disappear, are swallowed, or just stagnate. What happens then after the major crash or crashes? Well, politicians and policymakers are put under the very strong pressure of the winners to maintain the status quo, and of those left behind to change what's going on. And that's the time we are living right now. So market economies actually go through pendulous swings in income distribution. If we look at the Piketty and Size figures of the income earned by the top 1% of taxpayers in the US, including capital gains, from 1913 to 2018, so we start in 1913 when it's already mass production. We have the Roaring 20s and the 1930s. The top 1% of taxpayers had up to 25% of all income. And then when we get to the post-war golden age, that goes down to 10%. Obviously, there's always going to be a certain amount that goes to the rich, who are the ones who are investing on all this, but not the level at which they were then and they are now, because this is what we now have, the same thing, 25%, about 20 to 25% in the hands of the top 1% in the US, and it's more or less similar in most advanced countries, and even China has now developed in that way too, with a very unequal income distribution. So here we have the first bubble. This is the second bubble. And here we are still jumping. This is the current information revolution with the possibility of a better time. So what happens is that after reaching anger-provoking inequality in installation, each golden age has lifted another layer of the population to the good life. We know about the satanic mills at the beginning in the Industrial Revolution, but we also know that today in the advanced countries, blue-collar workers have homes, cars, children going to university, or at least they had in the post-war golden age. That has changed for quite a few of them. But basically, we have gone from very, very terrible conditions to incredibly better. But it's only by layers that capitalism does this. So the first revolution only picked up the industrialists. The aristocrats accepted the industrialists to come up to them. And of course, there were the new cities and all that advance. Then the second lifted the educated middle class. We have read the literature of the time, and we have seen the movies, and there is this layer of educated accountants, teachers, all these people who became, and of course, the dressmakers and the hat makers and all these other things. The third lifted the skilled workers. They were called worker aristocracy at the time. And there was a big difference within the workers between the really skilled ones, because this was heavy engineering. Remember, we're talking about huge bridges being built, very complicated structures, buildings. Also at the time, chemistry, capital goods, equipment, machinery, very complicated, big steam engines, electricity, the electrical industry, all these things were happening then. So the skilled workers were necessary, and they were well paid, and they had good lives. Then we come to the fourth, and then the blue-collar workers were also lifted. Of course, not in the third world, or not so much, only very few. So will our deployment now be also like this post-war boom? Will we come back to, in a pendular way, to better income distribution and lift another layer of the population into the good life? Perhaps it will depend on us. In fact, the reversal of inequality is a response to the intensity of the pressure and the threat to the system at the turning point. It is not, most people who are really doing well don't even notice what's really happening unless people get angry and start voting for the populists and start making life difficult in all sorts of ways. So that's what happens at the turning point. What's the nature of the turning point? Well, as the 1930s and now, de-skilling of many workers from the previous industries, unemployment or underemployment, people who are highly skilled having to do very simple jobs and paid much worse than before, hopelessness, inequality, casino finance, funding finance and betting and making a lot of money without really creating jobs or doing anything for the actual real economy, giant monopolies, which we now have, of course, feeble growth, talk of secular stagnation. In fact, the first time that term was used by Alvin Hansen was in the 1930s, which is a time similar to what some people are saying now. Recessions, even depression. Xenophobia, it could be the Jews or the Muslims or the Mexicans or the whatever. There is this blaming somebody for what's happening to me. Somebody must be, and generally it's the other. Economic migrations, of course, and they can be very massive. In the British and the Europeans migrated to the US in great numbers during the difficult times of the 1870s, 80s. Social unrest, political cleavages, political parties break apart because some people are looking backward and some people are looking forward. New movements emerge. They are for different reasons, because there is a lot of discontent. So people start fighting for different causes. And of course, within political parties, those who look backward to what used to be and those who look forward to what could be actually divide internally. And of course, I have already mentioned frequently the populist messianic leaders who offer more than they can fulfill. That's all happening while there is a huge underlying technological potential that lacks a clear synergistic direction. Because the information revolution and some of the biotech things and all, they're waiting to be used to solve the whole thing and to create jobs at the same time as they increase productivity in the places where they destroy jobs. So why is this golden age, the golden age of this revolution, so delayed? Why such a protracted installation and turning point this time? There are three reasons that are in the nature of the technology. It's the first time that mental work is being mechanized. Normally, we were talking about manual work. That's what mechanized really meant to us. But now we're talking about a complete world, the whole world of information, the whole world of interactions. All those things are being mechanized. Another reason in the nature of the technology is that it has expanded to a global economy that's much larger than the previous time. Now it really incorporates everybody. I mean, you know very well that even people in the furthest corners of poor countries have mobile phones. We are talking about a much greater global economy. Then another point is that the infrastructure for this revolution, the internet, came 23 years after the microprocessor. So in fact, we had the microprocessor in 71 and we had the internet in 93. Every other revolution, most of them had begun, I mean, the canals began from the very beginning. The railways actually were the ones that started the revolution. And in the third revolution, we also had the steamships beginning, the whole from very early on, and the shift from iron railways to steel railways, which were capable of really going much faster. Also, the steam engines were made of steel and not of iron, so it's not so brittle. So they could go much faster, they could go much further. That's how we were able to get transcontinental railways. Otherwise, it would not have been possible with iron. And also, the iron rails rusted very quickly. So it was a big, big change to have all that infrastructure at the time, whereas the internet came quite late. And it changed the whole thing. At first, it was just computers and software and using telecoms. And then the internet created the whole web world, which changed the economy very significantly. But those reasons, every technology is different. So every technology will have peculiarities, which will make it longer, shorter, this or that. There are different conditions. But there are two others now that are in the politics and geopolitics of the process this time. One of them, obviously, is China. China gave a new lease of life to the mature mass production paradigm. So remember when we had, those of you who can remember the 1970s, when we had the stagflation, that was the maturity of mass production. But then from the 80s and 90s, we had Asia, and particularly China, taking up the whole of this mature industry and making it, first of all, with very low-cost labor, with very long hours, with very long assembly lines, and eventually incorporating computers in every post. So in fact, they renewed mass production. But the other thing, the really serious one, is that finance has been rescued twice. It has become a powerful global casino, decoupled from the real economy and disconnected from national governments. So in fact, it's like a separate power. Nobody can control them. And if anybody tried, then you just go fight to the basement, because finance can move anywhere. They have a 24-hour movement across the globe. They can do whatever they want, and they bet on finance, and they're doing that. So in fact, the transformation that should be happening in the whole economy through funding the real economy and all the changes we need, especially the green transformation. No, they're playing around with crypto and with all this, with arbitrage and all the other things that finance knows how to do. But of course, the pattern is not mechanical, so we don't have to expect that this revolution will be the same as the others. There is a pattern which has to do with how the market economy works. The process really responds to the nature of the market economy. But each revolution and each context are unique, and they give their own shape to the pattern. In fact, there might still be a third financial crash ahead. What is the nature of the golden age? It's a positive-sum game between business and society, orchestrated by government, as I suggested before. What do they do? Well, tilt the playing field, giving a direction for synergy in innovation and investment, guiding government business to go in similar directions. Reversing inequality, of course, towards increasing social peace, and also guaranteeing dynamic demand. And finally, the most important, recoupling finance and production. This is generally done by systemic regulation and creating a coherent relative cost structure. So if you tax the bads and subsidize the goods, so make it easier to, in terms of cost, to do the right thing, then we will be better off in the golden age. I guess we could see it as a socio-institutional revolution, responding to the potential of the technological one. Because, of course, a technological revolution provides many paths. You can go in many directions. So the institutional revolutions, the social revolution, chooses among those directions the one that is most likely to produce a golden age for society. Of course, you could make a mistake, but hopefully we won't. But of course, it can also be weak or just continue as a gilded age. It's not necessary to have a golden age. In fact, as I mentioned before, Britain in the third revolution didn't really have a golden age. The Belle Epoque, the Europeans had it in the continent, the US, the progressive era, but Britain had a tough time. They didn't really get a golden age. In fact, their welfare state began 10 years later. Why is a direction needed? Because the early decades are a huge experiment across the many possibilities of the new technologies. And among those, only a conscious shift in the relative cost structure will make what is best for society become the best for the market. Without that, we can have the current escapism to the metaverse, computer games, non-fungible tokens, crypto, and other financial adventures. That's the direction that's being taken. Whereas precisely when society urgently needs more green innovation in materials, agriculture, energy, food, health, construction, and in the massive modernization of institutions, education, welfare, multi-level government, and so on. So happens that information technologies are the best instruments to innovate in all that. And it's not happening enough. It's happening very little. A lot of talent is being wasted. So let's look at the golden age of the mass production revolution and the one that we could have now. How did Keynesian democracy shape the post-war golden age? Well, apart from creating the Marshall Plan, the IMF, the World Bank, the GATT, the dollar gold, and the UN for World Trade and Stability, what else did they do? I mean, this was all the framework. huge innovations. Well, they tilted the context in clear directions for innovations, which were they? Suburbanization, post-war reconstruction, and the Cold War. They also provided demand volume in profile and trends through the welfare state, strengthening the labor unions so that they would make sure that wages would increase with productivity, public procurement, the credit system. So it was quite a set of innovations for increasing demand. Then innovation enablers for mass production, universally available at low cost. What was that? Cheap oil and materials, especially plastics, universal electricity, road and airways networks. Markets alone could never have done it. The elements, of course, were provided in different proportions by each first world government, while third world countries struggled to develop while producing cheap materials, food, and energy, which were all important in order for manufacturing to be the center of that direction for suburbanization and, of course, the Cold War, all the military things, and the reconstruction, which was the capital goods of the time. It was a major socio-institutional revolution, redesigning government, which is something that we definitely need to do today, and accelerating and expanding the production and lifestyle changes across society. Because the new highly productive industries destroy jobs and skills, and it's the new lifestyles that are crucial in golden ages to create new demand and new jobs. What happened in the with the urban Victorian living, the age of steam, coal, iron, railways, and mechanization? Well, manufacturing did the textiles, did the pottery, but there was an enormous amount of things that were handmade, everything else. New jobs in crafts and services and in trade and all the shopping and the rest. The cosmopolitan living in the Belle Epoque, in the age of steel and heavy engineering, the third was the first globalization. Well, industry provided the electricity, the paint, the materials, all these things, but carpets and objects of art came from all over the world. Of course, it was a globalization, but you also had new services in construction, in entertainment, hotels, cafes, restaurants, theaters, books, news. I mean, the Belle Epoque was all about being outdoors. And then the suburban family living being indoors. The age of the automobile, oil, petrochemicals, and mass production. All products were manufactured, preferably with plastic. And you had new jobs in construction, services, commerce, advertising, banks, everything that served the suburban families. And of course, there were also big cities with similar ways of living, even within the cities. Now, in the 21st century, digital and green lifestyles could create many new jobs, many new jobs. Just think of a rental economy, for instance, to have maintenance in all the consuming countries and all the spare parts being 3D printed and being on the web so that you can have an enormous amount of jobs. So what could our new golden age be? Well, smart, green, fair, and global growth for a positive sum game in a healthy planet. We'd have the green direction with a modernized welfare and global development and cheap universal ICT. Everybody should have access to low-cost internet. So what does the green direction do? Well, if you revamp transport, energy, materials, agriculture, food, construction, lifestyles, and production systems to make them sustainable, that would be equivalent to post-war reconstruction and suburbanization. Then welfare and global development, while incorporating successive new millions into sustainable consumption, is equivalent to the welfare state and government procurement in terms of demand creation. And of course, it will stem desperate economic migrations. That's as long as there is this enormous inequality, people will desperately be looking to come to the advanced world. Nobody wants to leave their country, really. They do because they're desperate. Full internet access at low cost is equivalent to electrification and suburbanization in facilitating demand, and this time very important for education, in fact, indispensable for education. Poor children who do not have access to internet, who do not have a mobile phone, who do not have an iPad or a computer, are at a huge disadvantage. And why would we combine smart and green? Because the energy and materials intensive, unavoidably wasteful mass production revolution that gave us the good life before is the main cause of the threats of climate change and resource depletion. Whereas the information revolution, with the intangible nature of software and internet mobility, provides the best set of tools to turn products into services and generally reverse the trends. So smart green lifestyles and production methods are the way for successful deployment. However, the lifestyle shift will not happen by guilt or fear, but by desire and aspiration, by seeing it as the better life, as the life that you really want. And that's in fact how all the lifestyle changes have occurred, generally beginning with the rich and the educated and then percolating down as scale allows prices to come down. Now, why should be both fair in the advanced world and global? Well, apart from the obvious humanitarian and simple justice reasons, it must be fair within the advanced world, because losing the better life you had and thinking your children will be worse off breeds resentment, which is an incendiary recipe for populism and violence. Increasing injustice is just not viable. It must be global to lift the developing world. Why? Because the green transition has to be planetary. I mean, if we change everything in the north and the south continues with fossil fuels and all the rest, we won't solve the problem. And because the advanced world needs those markets for capital goods, engineering, etc., that would be the demand that's needed. Consumer goods production is not coming back. If it comes back, it'll come back with robots. So you won't have the demand and you won't have the employment. And desperate migrations would not stop if we don't do global development. So sharing prosperity within and between countries while greening the economy will require major innovations by governments and businesses. We have to realize that every time there has been a golden age, it has been accompanied by a range, very wide range of innovation. Much entrepreneurship and business imagination will be needed to cater to the new lifestyle. So if we go towards a smart, green, good life, we'd have more services than products, rental and maintenance of truly durable goods, computer-guided hydroponic agriculture around cities and many other localized production, interactive smart grids to control electricity usage, MOOCs and other online teaching and learning, virtual events and online meetings, less travel. Well, we already know about that because of the pandemic. Low energy, low waste architecture, streamed films and music, online news, digital books, and everything else you can invent. There is an enormous range of possibilities. And also much imagination, boldness, and consensus will be required to set up the new institutions for inclusion. Fair global future for the information age might involve, there are many proposals now, a safety net for the gig economy. Good wages for services will be essential for life and for demand. New green architecture, 15-minute city hubs, creating good jobs for well-being and the environment in construction and transformation. Universal basic income, perhaps handled with artificial intelligence, no bureaucracy, ATMs, just a debit card and reimbursement as tax by all the ones that don't need it. Baby bonds, maybe, that's another possibility, something that will give people stability. The increase in the cost of fossil fuels and materials. That sounds strange, but not only a tax, but maybe other ways of increasing costs to encourage materials and energy saving, and also to help fund development. So somehow that money, that extra payment for materials and energy perhaps could be paid to the producers rather than as a tax in the advanced world. And maybe we could set up a financial transactions tax for a Marshall Plan to fund development. It's not going to be so easy for countries that are trying to do their green transformation to also help the developing world. But something like this, if it funds development, it also funds investment. So you can also promote innovation in sustainable capital goods in the more advanced world. So many things. I mean, these are only 5 examples or 6 examples of what's being discussed, but we need much more imagination for that. Now, the final question, why can Europe lead the socio-institutional changes? Why do I think so? Well, the leaders of the post-war world gave the example to follow. The main tasks today, as then, involves 3 areas of institutional innovation. Multi-level governance, this time from the local to the supranational. The redesign of the welfare state for a world of self-employment, reskilling, and mobility. The promotion of dynamic markets through green production and lifestyles and global development, as we've been discussing. So why can Europe take the lead? Because it is well placed for the socio-institutional revolution required now. It's not the hegemon on the world stage, but it's probably the most credible mediator. It's experienced in facing multinational and multi-level governance, and it's still innovating, and it's going to innovate a lot more. We have to eliminate bureaucracy. I mean, bureaucracy in the sense of a lot of rules and a lot of stiff bureaucracies, intelligent bureaucracies, competent bureaucracies, that's what we need, but also a lot of artificial intelligence and a lot of digital stuff, not just turning the old methods into digital, but actually making a big transformation to make government as easy to use as Amazon. Since the late 19th century, Europe has been at the vanguard of innovation in social safety nets. I mean, Bismarck was the one who began already in the 1880s. But then there has been, I mean, what the Swedes have done, there has been what the Germans have done. There has been a whole lot of innovation in Europe that can be not necessarily copied, because that's what was good before. We need to invent new ones that are adequate for the current conditions. And the EU, its member governments and its populations have taken the green transition very seriously and have been acting upon it. So pioneering in the European way of life and in green innovation will enable European businesses to take the leadership in several areas. And Europe can do it, and Europe should do it. The way out of the crisis is not a return to business as usual. The shock has to be overcome, and it is done by reimagining the future. We must set up a positive-sum games between business and society, between advanced, emerging, and developing countries, and between humanity and the planet. And Europe can and should take the lead. Thank you.